Throughout his legendary tenure as host of The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson encountered numerous celebrities who pushed boundaries, challenged authority, and in some cases completely shattered the unspoken rules of late-night television. These 8 stars found themselves on Carson's permanent blacklist after unforgettable confrontations that revealed the hidden power dynamics of network television.
In New York, broke every record. It was wonderful.
Did
Fabulous.
you really?
Oh, the women find
Joan Rivers. Perhaps the most heartbreaking and professionally significant story involves Joan Rivers, once Carson's trusted protege and frequent guest host. Their relationship extended beyond professional courtesy. Rivers was essentially family, the one person Carson entrusted with his coveted chair during vacations. This made her 1986 decision to accept a $10 million offer to host a competing late-night show on Fox feel like a deep personal wound. In the landscape of 1980s television, The Tonight Show wasn't just a program, it was an institution, and Carson was its undisputed king. A competing show led by his hand-picked successor was a direct act of war. Rivers didn't just professionally betray Carson, she publicly humiliated him on the national stage, turning his mentorship into a weapon against him. According to Rivers, she immediately called Carson to explain, viewing him as a friend and mentor. But the conversation was brutally brief. She recalls him hanging up on her mid-sentence, and that was it. For nearly 3 decades, Carson maintained a stony, absolute silence. He refused to read her letters, take her calls, or even allow her name to be mentioned in his presence. NBC, following his lead, treated her as persona non grata. The friendship that had seemed so genuine evaporated over what Carson perceived as the ultimate professional betrayal. Rivers spent the rest of her life trying to apologize, publicly expressing her regret and grief over the lost friendship. The tragedy is that both died without ever reconciling, their last conversation ending not with a discussion, but with a dial tone. This feud became a legendary cautionary tale in the entertainment industry about the delicate balance between loyalty, mentorship, and the ruthless cost of ambition.
I may not be up on these things exactly, but what would you
What
call
am I wearing?
Yeah, if I went into a lingerie shop and I...
Madonna. When Madonna appeared on The Tonight Show in September 1987, she brought the rebellious, sexually charged energy of the MTV era crashing headfirst into Carson's more traditional established domain. At that moment, she was not just a pop star, she was a cultural phenomenon deliberately challenging every norm. From the moment she walked on stage, it was clear she had no intention of playing by the old rules. She immediately broke protocol by eschewing the guest chair and instead perching directly on Carson's desk, a physical act of domination that immediately shifted the power dynamic. What followed was a masterclass in calculated provocation and on-air abuse of Carson's authority. She leaned into heavy, explicit innuendo that went far beyond the show's usual playful flirtation, discussing topics that were considered taboo for network television. You could see the flicker of discomfort in Carson's eyes, a rare crack in his unflappable facade as Madonna systematically dismantled his control over the interview. This was more than a generational clash. It was a hostile takeover of the airwaves. Carson represented the old guard, where interviews were carefully curated conversations. Madonna, representing the new wave of celebrity, treated the show as a platform for her performance art, turning Carson into a prop in her seductive act. She wasn't there to talk about her new album. She was there to demonstrate that even the king of late night was powerless against the new forces of pop culture. This appearance remains a historical artifact, showing the precise moment the balance of power shifted from the television establishment to the self-made icons of the MTV generation.
What? That was the most humble, just kind of self-effacing entrance I've seen.
Excuse me. Do you feel my pants? The lady, Amy...
Charles Grodin. Charles Grodin brought a unique and utterly baffling form of disrespect to Carson's couch, a sustained, genuine hostility that was so uncomfortable it was often mistaken for high-concept comedy. His appearances followed a predictable and excruciating pattern of verbal abuse toward Carson. He would sit down with an air of profound boredom, sighing heavily as if he'd been dragged to the world's most tedious event. He would then immediately begin complaining, not as a bit, but with what seemed like real annoyance. He accused Carson of not actually caring about his guests, of asking superficial questions, and of not genuinely listening to the answers. In one legendary exchange, Grodin relentlessly badgered Carson about his sincerity, asking if he ever worried about anything beyond himself and the show, reducing global issues to a mere monologue punchline. He would look directly at the camera instead of at Johnny, as if appealing to the audience to witness his suffering. He would interrupt Carson only to complain about being interrupted. What makes this case so fascinating is Carson's reaction. Instead of banning him, Johnny kept inviting him back, seemingly intrigued or morbidly entertained by the genuine discomfort Grodin created. Yet, a significant portion of the audience saw Grodin as an ungrateful jerk who was fundamentally disrespecting the king of late night on his own throne. In an era where guests were grateful for the exposure, Grodin's act was a revolutionary form of antagonism that challenged the very foundation of the celebrity talk show format, systematically abusing Carson's hospitality and good nature for his own entertainment.
Scientists.
Right.
You have Dr. Jonas Salk, a great researcher.
Right.
You have Madame Curie.
Jerry Lewis Johnny Carson was fiercely protective of his Tonight Show family, and he drew an absolute non-negotiable line when it came to the mistreatment of his staff. Jerry Lewis, a Hollywood titan known for his own tyrannical behavior on film sets, crossed that line permanently. The incident occurred after one of Lewis's guest appearances when something went wrong with the monologue timing. Whether the cue cards were out of order, a technical glitch occurred, or Lewis simply needed a scapegoat for a flubbed joke, the result was the same. He turned his fury on Carson's longtime beloved cue card man and unleashed a verbal tirade of abuse in front of the entire staff. He humiliated the man, calling him incompetent and berating him with a cruelty that left everyone in stunned silence. This was not just abuse of a staff member, it was a direct challenge to Carson's authority and leadership. By attacking someone under Carson's protection, Lewis was implicitly attacking Carson himself. When word of this incident reached Johnny Carson, his response was swift and final. There was no discussion, no warning, no second chance. In Carson's world, you could challenge him, you could be a difficult guest, you could even bomb on his show. But if you abused one of his people, someone who was part of the trusted team that made the show work every night, you were finished. Lewis was banned from The Tonight Show for the remainder of Carson's tenure. This incident reveals what truly mattered to the host, not his own ego, but the integrity and well-being of the loyal crew who were the backbone of his legendary run.
Burbank, and I walked into his office. And he was there with his producer, and whom I had known for a lot of years.
Wayne Newton. The feud between Johnny Carson and Wayne Newton escalated from a war of words into a shocking physical confrontation, one of the ugliest in the show's history. The conflict began in the mid-1980s when Newton beat out a Carson-connected investment group to purchase the Aladdin Casino in Las Vegas. A seemingly straightforward business deal became deeply personal when Carson began targeting Newton relentlessly in his monologues. These weren't harmless roasts, they were vicious jokes implying Newton was effeminate, which in that less tolerant era was genuinely damaging to a celebrity's public image and career. Carson's nightly attacks were a form of televised abuse, using his platform to systematically undermine Newton's reputation. Newton, feeling helpless as the jokes aired night after night, tried to go through official channels at NBC, but his pleas were ignored. Finally, pushed to his breaking point, Newton decided to handle it himself. He drove directly to NBC, walked into Carson's office, and after asking the producer to leave, confronted the host. According to Newton's own account on a later talk show, the confrontation became physical. "I smacked him," Newton stated plainly, describing an open-handed strike born of pure frustration. The tension in that room must have been suffocating. Remarkably, the public jokes stopped immediately after that confrontation. This incident revealed a side of Carson rarely seen, the powerful media titan who could be pushed into a corner, and the man who could be brought to heel by a direct physical challenge to his authority. Lola Falana. The case of Lola Falana illustrates the quiet but devastating power of informal blacklisting in 1970s television. Falana was a Tonight Show regular throughout. The Decade, a dazzling performer known as the Queen of Las Vegas, who appeared on the show more than a dozen times to promote her sellout residencies. She was a vibrant, welcome presence. Then, suddenly and without explanation, her invitations stopped. She went from being a frequent guest to being completely erased from the show's roster. The exact reason remains a subject of speculation, but the theories point to the precarious politics of the era. One version suggests that during an appearance, Falana spoke unusually bluntly about her experiences with racial discrimination, saying things that were true, but made the predominantly white NBC executives deeply uncomfortable. In the 1970s, such topics were carefully managed on network TV, and her candor may have been seen as a violation of the safe space Carson provided. This was a form of on-air rebellion against the unspoken rules that governed guest behavior, a challenge to Carson's control over the content of his show. Another theory posits she became collateral damage after publicly defending Wayne Newton while Carson was relentlessly mocking him. In either scenario, Falana's story is a stark reminder of the unspoken rules guests, especially performers of color, had to navigate. She was disappeared without explanation or a chance to defend herself, a powerful demonstration of how absolute Carson's authority was and how easily a star could be cast aside for making the wrong people uncomfortable.
It's funny, you're so loyal. You're wearing your Christmas tie already, huh?
That's right. Got
Isn't
my,
that nice?
my tie for the network.
Very beautiful.
You look very sharp tonight.
I'd never said a thing like that to you.
Bob Hope. It's a shocking fact to many old-school Tonight Show viewers that despite being a constant presence for decades, Bob Hope was privately considered by Johnny Carson to be his least favorite guest. This sentiment, revealed by Carson's biographers, is particularly poignant because Hope was one of Carson's childhood idols. The disrespect wasn't born from a single explosive incident, but from a slow, grinding pattern that drove Carson and his producers crazy. Hope would arrive for his appearances with a pre-written script already on cue cards, complete with a list of product plugs for his upcoming TV specials or USO tours. The interview was never a conversation. It was a performance. Hope would barely interact with Johnny, instead delivering his lines directly to the camera, treating the host as a mere prop or a teleprompter with a pulse. This approach was the antithesis of everything that made The Tonight Show feel alive and spontaneous. Carson had built his legacy on authentic, unscripted conversation, while Hope treated the show like a relic from the 1950s variety show era. To Johnny, this felt like a profound but subtle disrespect. Hope was using his platform as a personal billboard, ignoring the show's very essence and treating the host like a supporting player in his own show. This was a form of professional abuse, disregarding Carson's role as interviewer and reducing him to a mere introducer for Hope's material. Viewers could sense the stiffness in those segments, which lacked the effortless chemistry Carson shared with guests who understood and respected the format.
NBC made another brilliant decision.
The smart move, yeah.
Chevy Chase. Being asked to guest host The Tonight Show in the 1970s was one of the highest honors in comedy, a sign that Johnny Carson trusted you enough to hand over the keys to his kingdom. It was also a test. Chevy Chase failed that test spectacularly in 1979. Chase, who already had a well-documented reputation for arrogance and abrasive behavior from his time at SNL, used his opportunity not to create a fun, inclusive atmosphere, but to showcase his own perceived superiority at the expense of others. During his episode, he openly needled and mocked prop comic Gallagher in a way that felt genuinely mean-spirited and bullying. He conducted his interview with actress Barbara Bach in a manner that made her visibly uncomfortable, leaving her to smile through an awkwardness that was palpable to viewers at home. Fans and critics alike called Chase's guest hosting stint petty and small. He had violated the unwritten protocol. A guest host is a temporary caretaker, someone who makes the guests shine and maintains the show's welcoming tone. Chase did the opposite, using Carson's prestigious platform to punch down and elevate himself. This was a form of abuse, not just of his fellow guests, but of the trust Carson had placed in him. Carson, who reportedly had little regard for Chase's comedic instincts anyway, saw this as a fundamental disrespect for the institution he had built. Chase was never invited to guest host again, and his subsequent appearances on the show were marked by a cool professional distance. He had abused the privilege and been permanently branded as someone who didn't understand the respect the show demanded. While Johnny Carson's reign was marked by countless memorable interviews, his tenure was also punctuated by moments where celebrities crossed the line from entertaining to outright disrespectful. Beyond the infamous 8, other stars found themselves on Carson's wrong side through behavior that challenged his authority, disrespected his staff, or simply abused the platform he so carefully curated. Here are 4 more celebrities whose encounters with the king of late night went disastrously wrong. Kathleen Turner. In the mid-1980s, Kathleen Turner was the epitome of a modern, empowered Hollywood star, a confident, sultry presence who wasn't afraid to push boundaries. During her 1984 appearance, she brought that assertive energy directly to Carson's couch, creating a moment of on-air abuse that left the typically unflappable host visibly flustered. Turner didn't just engage in playful banter. She launched into a campaign of aggressive, unsolicited flirtation that treated Carson less like a venerable host and more like a personal conquest. She openly commented on his looks, told the audience he found her irresistible, and created a sexually charged atmosphere that was completely at odds with the show's established tone. You could see Carson trying to deflect and steer the conversation back to safer territory, but Turner relentlessly pressed on, flipping the traditional power dynamic and putting him in a position he was clearly uncomfortable with. This wasn't just a guest being flirty. It was a calculated power move that abused the hospitality of the show and disrespected Carson's role as an interviewer. While she wasn't blacklisted, the encounter was so famously awkward that it served as another example of the new guard of celebrities challenging the old-school rules of late-night television, leaving Carson to navigate a situation where his control was deliberately stripped away for shock value. Truman Capote. The legendary author Truman Capote's 1978 appearance stands as one of the most tragic and uncomfortable moments in Tonight Show history, a public spectacle of substance abuse that was profoundly disrespectful to the host and the audience. Capote, a literary titan, was in the throes of his well-documented battle with alcoholism. When he sat down with Carson, he was incoherent, slurring his words, and unable to form a complete thought. The interview devolved into a rambling, nonsensical monologue that culminated in Capote lying down on the couch in a state of utter collapse. This was a complete abuse of the platform and the invitation. Carson, ever the professional, tried desperately to salvage the segment, treating the fragile author with a delicate mixture of pity and frustration. But there was no saving it. Capote's behavior was an act of disrespect not born of malice, but of self-destruction. He had abused the national airtime, turning a coveted promotional opportunity into a sad public unraveling. For Carson, who prized sharp, witty conversation, it was an agonizing ordeal. The incident became infamous, a stark reminder of the pressures of fame, and a bridge burner that ensured Capote, in his condition, would never be welcomed back on the show. Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor's appearances on The Tonight Show were always electric, a volatile mix of genius and tension that frequently pushed the boundaries of network television. While Carson deeply respected Pryor's comedic brilliance, their encounters were fraught with a cultural and generational clash that constituted a form of abuse against the show's established standards. Pryor, a revolutionary voice in comedy, refused to censor his reality, which included his raw use of language and unflinching commentary on race and American life. This put him in direct conflict with Carson and the censors. Pryor would casually use racial slurs and describe explicit situations, forcing Carson to react with visible discomfort, often trying to steer the conversation to safer ground. Pryor wasn't being difficult for the sake of it. He was abusing the unspoken rules of the show because he found them artistically suffocating. He was forcing a cultural conversation on Carson's stage, challenging the very foundation of what was permissible on a network talk show. This wasn't a personal attack on Carson, but it was a profound disrespect for the format and its limitations. While Pryor was never truly blacklisted, his talent was too immense. His appearances were high-risk affairs that left Carson navigating a minefield, a guest host who respected the man but was constantly being abused by the revolutionary artist he couldn't fully contain. James Cagney. When a Hollywood legend of James Cagney's stature agrees to be on your show, it's supposed to be a coup. For Johnny Carson, however, Cagney's appearances were exercises in frustration, defined by a passive-aggressive disrespect that was as maddening as any open confrontation. Cagney, an icon known for his tough guy roles, simply refused to play the part of the engaging talk show guest. He would sit on the couch, sullen and withdrawn, offering monosyllabic answers to Carson's most carefully crafted questions. There was no anecdote, no humor, no spark of the personality that had made him a star. This was a quiet but potent form of abuse. By refusing to participate, Cagney was implicitly communicating that the show, the format, and the host were not worthy of his energy or time. He was abusing the privilege of the platform, treating it as a tedious chore he was forced to endure. For a host like Carson, whose entire craft was built on the art of conversation, interviewing Cagney was like hitting a brick wall. It was a profound disrespect to Carson's skills and to the audience who had tuned in hoping to see the legend open up. While Cagney was too revered to be formally blacklisted, his difficult and unrewarding nature made him a guest the show and its host surely dreaded, a legend who tarnished his own legacy by refusing to respect the art of the interview.